and it's loving, caring, and sharing. And that's a thought that was left with us from my uncle Chet Caillou. And he always spoke about how we need to be loving and caring and sharing with one another, with our guests. That's who we are. And so those are values. Those are values that hopefully we can pick up and we can pass on to the next generation. There's a Lushootseed word, it's Hachusadat. And the simplified version of that is education, but really Hachusadat is traditions of the heart. And with traditions of the heart comes compassion. But tradition of the heart means that we know what our values are and we uphold those values. And it also means that we are informed by nature and the earth around us, because that is education. That is our education. Our wealth is not the almighty dollar. Our wealth is what comes from the sea. That's our wealth. Our wealth is how we spread the table. Our wealth is how much we can give away. And so it's a real different way of knowing and being than in a Western, public school kind of teaching and learning. And so that is the piece that we would like to bring in and introduce to our neighbors, and also, have our young people go through these experiences as families, as being connected to our elders, and start really picking up that language again. Because there are many tribes that are larger that speak pretty fluent or have fluent speakers. We do not have fluent speakers per se, but we have people that are learning to become fluent speakers today. And so that is why we prioritize that piece, because I think that there's a lot to be learned by these ancient stories, and just the terminology, which cannot be confused. It's not the English language. And terminology is there's often embedded in that a value system that really is connected to how we survive on the earth and on the water. And it's thousands of years old. Because why? Because our ancestors had that time to study their surroundings. And it was never, ever, we were not ever of the mindset of the ego mindset that says that we are in a hierarchy manner. We are in an existence where one is above another. That never existed, because we had to work together to survive circumstances where we didn't have electricity and we didn't have cars, and it was pretty difficult actually for our ancestors to live, hence studying the earth so that they could survive on it. And we're soon to be coming to that, because we seen what happened in Texas when the grid went down, and we're seeing a lot of fires and people were having a hard time breathing. And so I'm just saying that when we learn how to survive on the earth in a traditional manner, perhaps we can thrive, because the earth can take care of herself. There's been ancient civilizations that we know about, that there's evidence, that had pretty sophisticated, technology. I would have to say that I feel like our technology is pretty sophisticated today. I could be wrong, but here we are again. It's not like we haven't been down this road, as many scientists and many archaeologists and many people who have evidence, who've studied the earth, can attest to. And that's something that I think, we have these ancient stories, and embedded in their stories are some of these things that we feel like are so, way beyond us, and part of that is intuition. The other part of it is how we be well in our environment. So when we say, living in a traditional manner, what I'm saying is we have a canoe practice. And in that practice, we have racing canoes, and then we have journey canoes. The journey canoes are much bigger. The racing canoes are slimmer, slicker, lighter, and faster. We have that technology still today. We have that knowledge. We have one longhouse in the center of our village, and the thing about longhouses is if you think about how those were built before colonization happened, before, the 1800s, um, everybody had to participate because, if you think about the wood and the logs and felling a tree and many trees to build a longhouse that is massive, where over 100 people can live, um, that's a lot of heavy lifting. And so not one person or five people, it was a community of people that worked together to put up a longhouse that people could live in during the winter, that they could, have a place to weave. They had a place to tell stories. They had a place to be warm in. And so it's that, it's not like it's actually very practical. It's very practical, living off the land. And if we have that mentality, I think perhaps, a lot of people will be able to thrive in a healthier way, given the circumstances that we're in today. And I must say that I'm really, really excited that a lot of the a lot of the women are coming forward in indigenous communities, and their voices are being amplified now because of that connection that we as women have to the earth, that we are, we birth children, we are reflections of the earth herself, we feed our children. So a lot of those kind of teachings are coming back as well. Midwifery, for example, all of the homeopathic medicine that's happening today, ancient. If you think about where did that come from, it's old, thousands of years old. So, and then we have the Western medical field. But I'm just saying that there is ancient knowledge that we can pick up and we can learn from. Like, I like to practice yoga and I like to meditate. I like to do qigong, which is ancient. Why? Because it helps me to de-stress. So I'm picking up things that are helpful. That's not to say that you have to do one thing one way all the time, because that's sort of impractical, given, the ever-changing environment that we live in, because the environment is always changing. Just like as we age, we as human beings, we change. We are reflections of the earth. And so therefore, a long time ago, Carrie Dan of Western Shoshone, her and her sister ran the Dan Ranch, and they had a big strife with the federal government trying to take away their cattle and not let them be who they were. She always said, back in the 90s, she always said, the earth has a fever. The earth has a fever, and she's going to purge, because that's what you do when you have a fever. It's a no-brainer. We are of the same DNA. That's what John Trudell always says, right? We are of the same DNA of the earth. So, we have to behave as if the earth matters. And so that's a large part of the work that we are trying to do in our Protect Mother Earth subcommittee and this resilience project. And so my hope and my prayer is that it will be meaningful for our community and those that are partners to us and beyond. So we're just doing the best we can. That's all. We're just doing the best we can to remember who we are and practice who we are.
For those who don't know, the Swinomish tribe is part of a larger community of Salish peoples. And across this world, I call it the Coast Salish universe, there's been a lot of trouble and strife, and part of that has been flooding, actual, flooding of villages and so forth, like we've seen in Alaska. And there's been, political challenges around that. Can you talk a little bit about what some other tribes and villages are seeing and what hardships they're facing that are actual and physical on the ground due to climate change?
Yeah, so we have what's called the National Congress of American Indians, and it's a pretty big lobbying force of all of the indigenous communities throughout the country. And Fawn Sharp is the president, and she is also a Quinault tribal member. And the tribes on the coast, where her tribe is on the west coast, are being inundated by flooding, and there's a lot of storm surges happening, tsunami type situations that are occurring, and the land is really eroding, and so they're being forced. The whole tribe, there's little tribes, near Quinault, and those tribes are looking at plans to relocate because of, the way that the tides are sort of blowing into the land, and how the land is then eroding, kind of like the Gwich'in and the people up in the north on the Arctic, right? That their land is being impacted as well. It's eroding. It's going into the sea, and the caribou are going away. They're being impacted. Same with our salmon. So that's the ecosystems that we're all connected to by the earth and the water, and the salmon swim all the way up there and come all the way back down, up north and come all the way back down. And so if they're not making it, it impacts a lot of indigenous communities. And so we're seeing a lot of what's happening in British Columbia with there's some fish farm operations that still want to operate. So there's blockades going on up there because, what happens when those kind of fish escape is they intermingle with the wild salmon. But some people call those farm salmon frankenfish. And there was a lot more of them back in the 90s, but as our fishery folks here, commercial fishery folks, non-native fisheries and native fisheries alike, started to see the impact of that wild salmon, the fact that they could make the flesh of that salmon any color by injecting dye to make it look real healthy and pink, as opposed to what it would look like, grayish, kind of whitish flesh, not very appetizing. And then they started having a lot of fecal matter, like smothering below the sea. And so it started killing off all the sea life. And then there's sea lice, on and on. So when that happens, your whole ecosystem is impacted. And so there's been a big movement to shut down those fish farms around here. We had a big escape off of Cypress Island. So Lummi, Swinomish, all these tribes came up and they started trying to get all that farm salmon out of the water, because what it does is it intermingles, like I said, and then you have another kind of species, I guess. So those are the kind of impacts that we're seeing, as well as, the Burrard Swallowtooth Nation up there in British Columbia. They're very concerned about their waterway, and it's very, very slim channel that these big oil tankers and other cargo ships go through, and there's a lot of ships that go through there, and it's really impacting their sea life and their ability to practice who they are. And so they're protesting up there, and on top of that, they have that Trans Mountain pipeline coming through, and it's not unlike what we're seeing on the Mississippi. But that pipeline happens to have oil that would feed into the reservation's stolen land, which is called March Point, where 2 oil refineries are located on the north end of our reservation. And how that happened wasn't by agreement by the tribe, of course. At that time, Ulysses Grant signed a proclamation, well, it was an executive order that said that, this is really he demarked a map of the reservation, and he cut off March Point, that tip that goes way out into the bay. And he claimed that was not reservation land. And now today, industry has been built on there. There's 2 oil refineries that have been on there for a while. And our shellfish is poisoned out there. So we know that not to go gather shellfish out there. And so that's the circumstances. It's just on and on. I can go on, I'll give you a lot of different examples, but that is the reality that we're faced with. That's why we have to educate one another, work together, because it's not just impacting us anymore. That refinery is not just impacting us anymore. There's going to be like, what, more oil tankers coming through? Not a good idea. Tribes around here don't think that's a good idea.
Well, the word on the street about the oil industry is where there is oil, there will be spills.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that came up at Standing Rock and with Dakota Access Pipeline and Keystone XL and Trans Mountain
Yep.
and the protests that are occurring in British Columbia at Wet'suwet'en to block,
Yep.
the pipeline. So there's a major effort going on, politically and culturally that's in the news. And I can't believe Facebook, how many people are committed and working and protesting.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like a large movement. Does that surprise you that suddenly there's this presence of the care and concern you're talking about in a real
Mm-hmm.
world circumstance that's quite difficult, as far as negotiating with these companies
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
or the regional, territorial, provincial governments, state governments?
Mm-hmm. It's hopeful. It's hopeful. I'm hoping that with that surge that things can change really, but I'm of the mindset that if we don't stop things now and change our behavior, and some people will say, well, we're so addicted to oil that can never happen, that we have to take our time. But we already know that the earth will continue heating, and the more we develop fossil fuel industry and use that um, addiction, then we are pretty much sitting ducks. And I really feel that there's a lot of sweet deals that are being made, a lot of things that sound green and good and um, renewable, but the earth, I feel like the earth should have rights, and that this next generation are exerting their rights by suing the state, for example, brave young souls that are suing the state. And of course, there's a lot of uh, legal beagles that are supporting that work as well. And so that is promising. When we have legal entities that are willing to defend the earth, and I'm talking about, it comes from that book, Earth Jurisprudence, but I'm also talking about those lobbying, environmental legal lobbying groups that are really fighting hard to litigate matters of wrongdoing. And so that's the more extreme than sort of mediating and developing strategies for mitigation. It's really, a win-lose kind of situation. And I really feel that the fossil fuel industry has put us there. We're in a win-lose situation, and we can take our time and let the earth continue to warm and hope and pray, or we can stop our behavior like we did with this coronavirus. I think that virus had a lot to teach us about how we might be able to adapt better and more emergent. But I don't know, like there's a lot of naysayers still who didn't believe that the virus even exists. Just like there's a lot of people that want to say that there is not a climate crisis. But I like what Gora was saying in Inconvenient Truth. It's certainly inconvenient for a lot of people that don't want to look at it, but we need more people to be brave enough to look at it and to actually do something rather than sit on the fence and wait for someone else to do it, because it's only our future at stake. So I'm of the mindset that it is a crisis and we have to stop bad behavior now, and we have to start mitigating in a clear and coherent manner so that we can all survive. Thomas Binyaka talked about this many years ago, the Hopi Survival Kit. That's what that book is. If we read that, there's some knowledge in there.
Well, it's pretty amazing to be alive in these days because we have all these things that are going on, like the protests and the reclamation of language and identity and relationship to the land and those kinds of things, and the public protests. But at the same time, just down the road, you have 121-degree temperatures in British Columbia and whole towns bursting into flame.
Yep.
And the relationships seem to be expressible scientifically, that in terms of probability, and temperature rise and things like that, that it isn't a direct line, but there's a circumstantial relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
I'm just hoping that tribes aren't divided by, what would be the best strategy moving forward. My hope and my prayer is that we, as in the indicator species, will take action for the benefit of not only the future, but those indigenous people that are south of us that are being impacted now because of our convenient ability to drive a car or fly a plane or transport something, because it's costing them their lives and their livelihood now, today. Massive communities have been impacted by the oil industry. Look at Nigeria. So in Nigeria, one of the elders shared the story that it's changed their way of life. And how it's changed their way of life is that they used to be able to go around in these villages as a way of resolving conflict. They used to be able to go around and knock at the door and sing these ancient songs by way of spotlighting a wrongdoing and going to that person that did the wrongdoing to their relatives' homes and doing this. And then it was a peacemaking process. But when they built those huge shell oil operations there next to these villages, uh, if you see any kind of oil refinery, you'll see that they have lights on 24/7. They never go off. And so to them in Nigeria, it was like it was daylight all the time. It's like when you live in Alaska and it stays daylight, it was like that. So that ritual and that way of knowing and being in terms of your values around how you treat a wrongdoing, that was no longer. They couldn't do that because it never got dark. It had to be in the cloak of darkness. And so it changes a way of life, because when you can't go out in the cloak of darkness and practice a ritual around a wrongdoing and have some kind of resolve by that person's family, then you are having to modify a way of life, and that dispute resolution strategy goes away. You have to do something else. And so it changes a culture's behavior, and it changes the culture's food source, even when you have these kind of things happening. And here we are in the land of the privilege, and we can take our time maybe, and we can wait and see what's right. But while, indigenous people in another continent or south of us, or even north on the Arctic, are being impacted now. Their livelihoods, their homelands are going in the water. But we can, so I'm of the mindset that we have to change our behavior now, and we have to lock arms together and stop pretending like we can't do it.
right. Well, activists were killed in Nigeria, right? I forgot the gentleman's name that was very famous and, was
Mm-hmm.
met a very untimely end. And about that time, I was reading also about Ecuador
Mm-hmm.
and the Ashwar people and the Warani people, and how their lands had been polluted with oil, and
Mm-hmm.
that rivers had been polluted and so forth. And those were places for, sustenance and food supply and
Right.
community well-being. And there's a certain amount of that in Alaska, but there's a number of problems in Alaska in the villages, and one of them is sewage.
Mm-hmm.
There's no sewage system. There's no pollution control sometimes, or if pollution is released into a river or stream, it's not necessarily addressed. It can be mitigated in other ways rather than, say, stopped or removed or those kinds of things. And so
Mm-hmm.
from the research, it's been appalling to me how the conditions seem to be deteriorating in the Bering Sea villages.
Mhm.
and traditional hunting and fishing get more difficult. The ice pack is melting. The
Mhm.
ice pack protects the shoreline from erosion and destruction, and the permafrost. Our
Mhm.
industrial facilities, even the oil facilities are, leaning and falling over and breaking and spilling oil and these kinds of things.
Mhm.
And so it seems like that's another part of the crisis, but from a human rights perspective, it's appalling.
Mhm. Well, there's this other movement happening today, and it's really heartening that young people are taking to the streets, and there is a resurgence of movement happening. Standing Rock being one of the drivers, I think, to show people that hey, we can do this. You can come and help. It's going to be hard, perhaps, but standing together, we're stronger in numbers. And the fact of the matter is that that's how change happens over time. Martin Luther King and all of the marches and protests he did, and then, Billy Frank Jr. and all the fishing wars that were happening. It's just another iteration.
Hmm.
And what's causing alarm, I think, is because of the fires and is because people are talking about the salmon going away and people are getting educated. And here in the state of Washington, some schools are actually, trying their best to partner with tribes and find out what the issues are and find out how can we have you come and speak in our science class, or how can we have you come and talk to our young people about this climate issue, or the cultural ways of knowing and being and how we should behave in the world. And it's with that kind of energy, it's with that kind of education that we can pull together. We are also lifting on a term that comes from a story of pushing up the sky, and the term is Yahau. In the shoot seed, it's Yahau, and Yahau means to lift together. And so we're bringing those kind of words out in our language to show the way forward, because that that story that comes with that word, that where that word is highlighted, is about people who are different and speak different languages, walking around in a world where the sky was too low and bumping their heads on it, but they had no way to communicate with one another because they all spoke different languages. But then one day, the one of the elders came and said, in the elders council, they called to seek advice on what to do. Said we'll have a word. It'll be a how to proceed forward together. We'll say that word at a certain time at a certain place, and we'll all live together. Our shaved poles from those long time ago, they used to be really tall trees. We'll shave them into poles, and then we'll live together, and that's that Yahau. And that's kind of example of a story I was talking about earlier, where there's a lot of wisdom there, and you don't have to overthink it. It's practical, pretty practical, how we survive on the earth together. And that's what we're hoping to teach the young generation now, like how to pick some of that knowledge up, because they're going to have to work together. It's beyond our tribe's means to mitigate this situation, quite honestly. We don't
Hmm.
have a choice.